All right. So because this is a tight hour, we're going to begin on time, pretty much. So welcome to our public program with Nour Mobarak and Basma Alsharif. That is part of our field workshop artist in residence program at ICALA. This program is called Memory, Decay, Displacement, and Form. So my name is Aska Isa, and I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement, and I'm going to keep these remarks brief. But I will tell you a little bit about the field workshop. It is a space in the museum that is being offered to 5 local artists. During the pandemic, we felt that it was very important to share our space. And part of this exchange energy that's going on during the residency is support, of course, for the artists, but then also the development of one public program designed by the artists that offers a way to glimpse into the thinking process going on. We're sharing the bios in the chat, so we don't have to read them. But in essence, Nour Mobarak is an artist of the senses, often using the visual, but also sound and organic phenomena. Her partner in this program, Basma Alsharif, has a practice in moving images and documentary style video. Both have personal experiences growing up in beautiful countries that are unfortunately fraught with geopolitical tensions and clashes. And as artists, they rely on the combination of memory, transmission, and their personal recordings of history in the making. I'm going to pass it off to Nour, who will talk about her work and her desire to speak with Basma. And then we'll screen a short film by Basma titled Home Movies Gaza, which is a beautiful film that lasts about 20 minutes. And then we'll regroup to chat more. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll take a few moments at the end to address them. So in quick housekeeping, ICALA is currently closed for installation, but we will be reopening for our summer season of exhibitions on June 19th with Queer Communion, Ron Athey, a retrospective of the important LA-based performance artist. The show is curated by Amelia Jones. And in our project room, we'll have Kenneth Tam, Silent Spikes, which is traveling from the Queens Museum. And in our annex, we'll present the Plastic Bag Store, some film shorts and public programs around a project by artist Robin Frohart. And this is in partnership with the Center for the Art of Performance at UCLA. So please sign up for our mailing list and follow us on social media for all the public programs related to all of these shows. And with that, I'm going to thank you all for coming and pass it on to Nour.
Hi, Aska, and thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's been a huge honor to be able to be an artist in residence at ICALA, and I really have gotten so much from the opportunity, and yeah, I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful to be able to bring Basma here today, and so I get a little nervous, so I wrote something to introduce. So bear with me as I kind of just read right now for a little second. So I wanted to invite Basma today because I was invited by the ICLA to do this public program, and I was sort of at a loss as to what to present. With my time in residency at the ICALA, I've been working on making paintings from my past, from lived experiences and other memories, which I'm embedding into mycelium to allow the images to be destroyed. So here I'm showing an image which shows the process that this is not one of the memory images. This is when I did a different artwork using that same process of degrading images through mycelium. So the ones that I'm working on now, which I can't share because they're in progress and being grown and eaten into as we speak, is doing the same thing where I'm taking imagery to be destroyed and decayed. So while I was deciding what to do for this program, and while I was thinking about how to invite someone to maybe talk about memory in and of itself as a subject in visual culture, the most recent conflict began to rage in Gaza, and I just genuinely wanted to talk to my old friend Basma. who's born to Palestinian parents and herself quite nomadic. Her work has a wonderful way of remaining specific to herself while touching frankly on some of the geopolitical conditions that have shaped her life, or even, I venture to say, her people's past and future lives. Basma and I, along with our friend Benna, who's not here right now, used to hold dinners when we both lived in LA, and we would invite friends to eat our Levantine food and have parties in the style that our parents would when we were children. And while we were doing that, in doing so, we three sometimes saw reflections of ourselves in each other through our manners and glitches that we thought were so particular to only ourselves before we'd kind of all gotten together regularly. A similar effect in our hospitality styles, perhaps as we learned from our mothers, blended with a similar effect in our ways of creating boundaries, perhaps as we've learned through modern, Western pop discourse. All three of us are Westernized from the Arab diaspora, having each our own story, of course. But in the recent events, I began to think about how my current work is undergirded by the effect of my family's multiple displacements and relocations in my very early childhood, though I myself don't deal with the broader historical actualities as directly as Basma does. So perhaps in my own self-interest and investigation, I wanted to trace some similar impulses, and without too directly attempting to link false one-to-one causes and effects, which I have no interest in reproducing stereotypes or anything like that. I just wanted to look at some of the formal and thematic qualities in Basma's work that I relate to and maybe share in my own. I also realized that there'd be these eruptions of images from Gaza, and that by the time this talk came around, it would quiet down, and it might be a good time to look at Basma's work after the latest shock had settled to maybe see what our social media frenzy had not shown. So without further ado, I'm happy to watch Basma's home movies Gaza with you all.
Thank you, Nour. I'm not sure if I can respond right now, just quickly to say that it's a real pleasure to get to do this because I love you and I respect you very much as an artist and a thinker and someone who is able to navigate really intimate and complex psychological spaces in really unexpected and incredibly visceral ways. And that's something I very much relate to. And I feel, yeah, it was really great to live together, or to overlap briefly in LA and to have those dinners. And as you were doing this introduction, I was remembering so much on one of those particular nights, how we got into a super heated discussion about diaspora and how I feel like you were the only one who sort of had a really balanced perspective on it. And it's really nice to have a more kind of formal conversation on our work and to be able to share it with other people. And I'm really honored to be here.
كان أول إيقاع اعتادوا عليه هو التأرجح البطيء من الفجر إلى الغسق السريع، وكانوا يتقبلون في ارتياح مباهج الصباح والشمس الساطعة ومياه البحر الطاغية والهواء المنعش عندما يكون اللعب ممتعاً، وعندما تكون الحياة حافلة للغاية، بحيث يصبح الأمر غير ضروري وبالتالي يتوارى إلى ظل النسيان. ومع اقتراب فترة الظهيرة لدى سقوط فيضانات الضوء بشكل عمود تقريبا، كانت ألوان الصباح المتخشبة تتحول في نعوماتها لآلف وألوان طاقة. وكانت هناك أشياء غريبة تحدث في وقت الظهيرة.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing that again. I always remember those blue turkeys, which I saw the first time. I think the first time I saw that movie was like in 2014. You came to Portland and you did a screening, and I watched. It was you had a whole night of many of your shorts, and I remember being sort of like, it gave me much pause to just sort of have something that I couldn't quite articulated before me in watching those movies. That like I remember being really I just felt like there was something that you were able to pin down that I had never accessed before. So and I don't know why those blue turkeys really, I guess we'll talk more about that. But I guess I can start. Thank you. I mean, it's funny also watching it now with obviously degraded quality through Zoom, which we will touch on. Because clearly that it was a bit choppy, which is okay, because that's what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
So I'm just gonna, again, touch my notes to read a question out loud. Bear with me as I am not improvising. So I wanted to start off this conversation with the idea of decay as a formal quality. I'd like to start off by reading this Hito Steyrl quotation and then follow that up with a question. So here I go from Steyrl's essay, Missing People, Entanglement, Superposition, and Exhumation as Sites of Indeterminacy. Pop it up here so that you can follow along. A poor image is an image that remains unresolved, puzzling and inconclusive because of neglect or political denial, because of a lack of technology or funding, or because of nasty and incomplete recordings captured under risky circumstances. It cannot give a comprehensive account of the situation it is supposed to represent. But if whatever it tries to show is obscured, the conditions of its own validity become plainly visible. It is a subaltern and indeterminate object, excluded from legitimate discourse, from becoming fact, subject to disavowal, indifference, and repression. Their poverty is not a lack, but an additional layer of information, which is not about content but form. This form shows how the image is treated, how it is seen, passed on, or ignored, censored, and obliterated. So with that quotation is in mind, Basma, I wanted to ask you, in Home Movies Gaza, the act of overlaying images means stripping down and impoverishing individual images to create new ones. Otherwise, you film a television, pixelating in a poorly connected broadcast of some nature footage. There's the scene of the keyed out turkeys and the like, erased by digital blue blotches. And I wanted to ask, in the context of Steyrl's quotation, if you ever looked at these gestures as a way of you yourself degrading the image. Do you think that you're manipulating the image to do yourself what other political forces so often do to images? Or is that at all something that you think about?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. That quote is it's really great. That whole text is great. A lot of her writing is, I think, has done for me what you just said, that piece did for you, which is just puts into words what it is that I'm trying to get at oftentimes in my work. Not to say that, yeah, not to make any comparison, but but yeah, I mean, I definitely subconsciously, I mean, it wasn't maybe necessarily a conscious decision, but I felt like, especially with a place like Gaza, which is so heavily mediated and recorded and represented in the news, and we kind of have, if you follow the conflict closely, like we have so much we have so much footage from that place, and primarily that of conflict. And when I went back around the time that I was making that film, I wasn't planning to make a film in Gaza, and I hadn't visited for 10 years, which was a really difficult period because I had grown up going to Gaza for every year of my life, and then was sort of unable to go. And then after a 10-year break, I went back, and it coincided with one of the attacks that happened, one of Israel's attacks on Gaza, and I was kind of in shock and unable to make sense of what I was seeing. And I had this double thing that was happening of like imagining what it looked like as a recorded event, and also being on the ground, like with family, with friends, in a childhood home, like this sort of thing, and just having this incredible dissonance, and not wanting to just kind of make like a documentary or to retell the like
So
the no, that's okay. I'll just continue. Yeah, I wasn't interested in sort of like narrating what happened or what was happening around me factually. And I had just begun collecting a lot of footage without any idea what I was going to do with it. So I amassed a lot of stuff, and I was really just recording stuff for myself, like to have I don't know, a kind of archive of that moment, because I felt like I'm not going to be able to remember this once I leave. And I was recording before the war had started in 2012. And when I looked at the footage after I'd left, I thought, but this isn't at all what I experienced when I was there. And it's not very interesting just to see this place recorded and to see these kind of mundane, banal images. And what I understand is that what I understood of my time there, my connection to that place, is that it is really impossible to grasp the kind of violence that is taking place in occupied Palestine. And what I wanted to do was sort of make an image that would, like through manipulation, through the layering of information on what we're looking at, produce a kind of alternate vision of that place, one that isn't necessarily dictating to you history or politics, but is just really representing that place in a very fixed present that is sort of describing the horror without showing violent imagery. So I feel like part of degrading the image is also like a way of maybe taking control of it again, and feeling empowered in a way over an experience, but also a way of narrating a space which has so often been narrated by others. So I very much, I feel like there's something about the kind of this idea of the censored image, the ignored image, the obliterated image, and like one being inside that image, which is very much what I felt at the time, is that I just kept imagining that this is an image that someone else is viewing, and how do I make it different? How do I allow someone to project themselves into this space and not just see it as a kind of two-dimensional representation? Have we lost Nour?
We have a
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. They just slammed up, they were knocking on my door telling me that all of a sudden they're trimming trees and I had to move my car. I could not have, sorry about that.
No, I just continued on sort of speaking.
I know, thank you.
No, that's okay.
was
Yeah.
a disruption of image right there.
Yeah, what a world. I'm so sorry.
No,
And I mean, I was able to get some of that, but Oscar, since you were there, do you want to, I don't know.
I mean, I mean, I mean, I feel like I'd already kind of thought about some things in relation to your work. I'm happy to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow that question up, and thank you for replying. And I was listening to a lot of it, so I'm sorry if I can't respond with more clarity since I had to leave for half of it. But I'm just going to ask another question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So with regards to memory and the way it's activated, there's this idea that I often end up turning toward, which is this Beckettian way of dealing with failed or corrupted memory. Not necessarily memory, but the lack thereof, actually, characterized by, as Jonathan Lethem says, by meditation on the absent, circular, and amnesiac nature of human existence. I feel like your film feels perpetually in the present, somehow, like that certain memories had to be obliterated in order to be present. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you think about memory, either personal or collective, in regards to your work.
Yeah, I mean, this was exactly the kind of, like, it's very much touching on what I wanted to ask you about your work to speak about, but I can kind of respond from my perspective and then ask you. I've been reading so much about kind of trauma and how human beings process trauma and experience it in a physical way, and how the body sort of has a memory of the trauma that's beyond our own control of it. I'd mentioned to you when we spoke that I was reading from Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I was really kind of struck by an explanation of that physical sort of response, which might be very obvious to a lot of people, but the idea that, like, when a human being experiences a trauma, the body, obviously hormones are elevated and the body is having a physical response in order to sort of safely, or not even safely, but just to confront this like imminent danger. And if we're not able to return back to a safe space in which, okay, something has been restored, I know I'm safe, everything's fine, then our body is a kind of in a perpetual state of anxiety and isn't able to kind of move forward, so that when smaller, encounters with danger or something similar to what was the original trauma is experienced by that person, they're responding as if they're back in the space of that trauma. That's talking like much, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, nor have I studied it, but I was so captivated by this idea because I felt like, and to me that relates to both of our practices, is that in dealing with memory, I think there is something about coming from a place of conflict in which things haven't been reconciled that keeps us sort of in this very fixed state in which we sort of address everything that we come into contact with or that we engage with the same sort of like desire to resolve or address or engage with in a very, I don't know, like emotional or intimate or intense sort of way. It's this like fixation with something from the past as if it's in the present that I feel is what I'm trying to do in that work. And a lot of my work, I mean, in home movies, I'm kind of collapsing a past and a future into a present. I'm not necessarily describing the history of that place or trying to address the politics of it, but I'm really just like fixated in the present. How can the present even be understood without these things? And I feel like there's something really similar with your work, even though obviously it takes on a different form. But I feel like there's this kind of illogical space that memory creates, and it's kind of outside of time, it's outside of a physical space, so that whatever the form is that we're choosing to work in becomes the shape that memory is taking. And it's somehow like a fixation with a thing that hasn't been able to be reconciled, but rather than having it be, I don't know, something that's a loss or something that's that renders us powerless, I feel like we're almost circumventing it and saying, I am taking control of this, but not necessarily to resolve it, but to kind of sit in it and to allow others to enter into it, like there's a lack of specificity with something that is actually highly specific, highly intimate, autobiographical, personal, but there's a way of in both of our practices that I also can't really put my finger on, that I think is asking for people to have an audience to have a communal experience with our work. And I feel, yeah, I don't know, with Home Movies Gaza, I was really I was really trying to like make a work in my mind that I felt could welcome anybody, especially people who, not especially, but even people who are not at all interested in that part of the world or political conflict in general, but just to invite them into a space. And I feel like there's something very similar in like Father Fugue and the stuff that you're doing with mycelium. So maybe I can ask you my question, which is that I feel like there's a different way that you're working with like memory and with loss in each of those works. I mean, one still ongoing, but one finished. And I think like the way I see it is that in the work with your father, there's this kind of desire to preserve and to freeze in time, this really precarious and fleeting kind of time, even though I understand that you've like recorded over several years or maybe most of your life with him as his condition has deteriorated, but I sense this kind of like wanting to hold this space and not think about the future, but just to think about this like particular moment with him and your guys' interaction with each other. Whereas I feel like with the mycelium, it's actually your like enabling a decay process to happen. You're forcing a loss to happen and asking us to encounter it. And I'm just wondering why with this work, you're sort of creating a loss, and in the other one, you're sort of preserving it or freezing it in time, I guess. Oh, you're muted.
They're now like chopping up trees outside, so I hope you can hear me.
We hear you.
Okay. Well, so with Father Fugue, what Basma's referring to is a sound piece that I made, which it's a stereo sound piece. The left channel are all conversations with my father, who has this 30-second memory. So after every 30 seconds, he kind of resets and no longer remembers what we were just talking about. And on the right channel are improvised songs that I sing to myself, and then they're like composed into this one composition. In one of the iterations of the work, they're also actually embedded in pairs of mycelium sculptures, because that was when I first started thinking about the potentialities of mycelium as a substrate. But in response to your question, Basma, I think it's interesting. What I love about my father's condition is at this point he's been deteriorating, or his cognitive abilities have been declining since I was maybe 16. So I no longer think of it as a loss. I think it's been this very interesting experience of getting to know a person on their own terms at this point, and how it's actually a very pleasurable place for me. You know, I like go back to Lebanon and visit him for weeks at a time, where all of a sudden I'm in this other realm of total presence. And it can actually be incredibly relaxing, you know, and a very different a very different cognitive landscape, which has taught me a lot. And it's a different relationship to memory for sure. And I guess it does definitely make me activate my own way of thinking about my own long-term memories and how, and analyzing them and looking at them critically. And I guess I see with these new works that I'm making, using the mycelium to deteriorate them, it's not that I am only just destroying the image, it's of course like creating a different, a new image, since after a while, your memories are in and of themselves their own sort of object. And it's like, or, you know, as you think back to past experiences or past images, they're constantly sort of recreated, and time itself is manipulating that thing. And also time and maybe displacement. Like one thing that I thought was interesting about using the word displacement in this talk, for example, is of course the double meaning. There's displacement of a population, of a people, But there's also displacement in like the Freudian understanding of the term, which is that, you know, it takes different iterations, but you know, it's having the emotion that you would have toward one object or person or thing and displacing it and moving that emotion towards something else that is a more safe target. And so much of memory is also, you end up displacing or recreating these images. And I thought it was interesting while thinking about this talk, for example, just thinking about memory and displacement in that sense as well. Sorry, I realize that we're already out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, time has flown by. Keep going, Nour. I will also just ask people if they'd like to ask a question before we close to put it in the Q&A box. But if there are no questions, I just want to hear from you. That's great too.
Mm-hmm. That's all I was going to say is that for me, like the decay is almost not necessarily a loss. It is itself creating a new attribute to what is already always in decay.
Yeah. I guess I was wondering more like, is it because the subject matter is different that you have, or do you see them as kind of the same process, what you're doing when you're making the work with your father versus what you're doing with the mycelia? Like, do you see it as kind of identical processes? Because you also talk about this divorcing language from meaning in this interview that I'd read in Bidun magazine about like your fascination with that and how, I mean, when you listen to the record, I feel like there's a very similar kind of experience that happens where, yeah, I'm not really paying attention anymore to what you guys are saying or what the songs are, but I hear sounds and I feel like I'm in my own sort of like nostalgic understanding of what the relationship is. And there's so many moments where I like forget that it's you and your father because he's kind of flirtatious with you and you kind of flirt back. And there's this really beautiful, like, I don't know, like play that's happening between the two of you. And that, you know, every once in a while I remember like, no, but you're aware that he's in this space that you also can't access, but somehow you perform in order to make him at ease. I feel like you make him at ease a lot of the time. And this kind of the haunting sort of like operatic music in the background is always like, I don't know, pulling me out of that space in a way. And I feel, yeah, so I'm curious about this idea. I guess I'm mumbling or I'm rambling, but I'm curious about this idea of this choice, you know, this fascination with language and how you approach language that isn't necessarily meant to be legible, let's say, because you do work so much with like voice and other performances I've seen. I mean, the Mycelia project, I guess, is quite different from that, but so maybe you can address that, like the decision to not work with language with this project that you're currently working on, but also why, like, how do you, when you're working with language, how are you making decisions about what to include and leave out? Because we can assume if you've been recording him also for a really long time that what we get in the record are really just very precise excerpts, I guess, from his, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that for me, working with mycelium is very connected to the way that I work with language and performance, and that all of it to me is, again, these ideas of being able to break things down into like constituent rhizomatic parts, so the way that a mushroom reproduces, or the way that mycelium reproduces, is one wherein like one spore has all the DNA of the rest of the mycelial network. And so it grows through these like repetitions and these entanglements, and it moves between self-replication and sexual replication. And there's this inseparability that ends up happening, this like idea of like the plenum is activated, these sort of ideas that I'd already been thinking about, and with language and linguistics, you know, there's like there's these ideas of like how we attribute meaning to phonemes or to words or to language, and that ends up being pretty arbitrary. And as you repeat any word over and over and over again, you find that the meaning starts to dissolve. And so, and that it ends up being this sound that is in it of itself like this, I was thinking like voice plastic, you know, and so by moving, and then, you know, and the mycelium that I use is dealing by creating a positive out of decay. So it's taking decay and it's growing this object and using the deteriorating cognition of my father to then actually build sort of a work is similar to also when I perform and I collapse repeatedly, my body becoming this thing that's in constant position of decay and rebuilding. And so for me, it's this like entanglement that that very much accepts like this sort of dialectical, this constant experience of like an antithesis coming, like creating a positive out of decay.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, we of course wish we had more time to explore this, but for anyone who's in Los Angeles, on June 19th, there is Open Studio with Nour at ICALA. So you can see the works that she couldn't show because they're in process of growing or decaying in our space. And then you can actually witness this. Oh, here's one perhaps comment, not a question. If you look in the chat, we have Shannon who kindly made a comment. So nice.
The body keeps 51,000 spores a day, in fact.
Whoa, we should collaborate and make that work. The body.
It's so nice to have everybody thinking about this in the room. So there's also a book launch. Well, a book has come out from Sphere Studies, which is a recent project that you did. Nour, say 2 seconds, 2 bits about the book, which is very exciting.
Yeah, Recital Program put out a catalog of my show that I did October 2020 in LA, which you came to, Oscar, which was so nice to see you there. And the book is just images from the show. I got some poems in there, an essay written by Eli, and there's a CD of a stereo version of the sound piece that was in the show. I had made a 5-channel sound piece that was buried underground. So the CD is, not a perfect, but it's, a document. And we're having a book launch tomorrow night at Hakuna Matata, where we will just basically have the book, which you could get, or just hang out in the backyard.
Wonderful, but you can still get the book even if you're not in Los Angeles, right? So yeah. Thank you so much. And Basma, it was a pleasure to see your film. And if there's any announcement you'd like to make about things coming up to look out for, but otherwise we'll just keep an eye out.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I'm currently in production on something that'll be shown at the Museum of the Art Institute in Chicago in March of next year. So after much delay, I'm very excited to be working on that. If anybody in LA feels like being in Chicago, you're more than welcome. It's been really nice. It's really lovely to get to talk and to see familiar names in the chat. I really wish I was in LA right now and could join you guys for this launch and to see the work in person.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in from Berlin and staying up late after putting your kids to bed. It's so nice to see you, and maybe I'll see you this summer. I'll text you.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for coming, and have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.